Welcome to another video featuring the Dji Neo, and in this video I'm going to show you how you can squeeze another ounce of Neo goodness out of this bad boy by showing you how you can create hyperlapses. That's right, even though the Neo doesn't support hyperlapses, there's an old-fashioned way you can use to create them, and I'm going to show you exactly how you can do it. So what is a hyperlapse? It's basically a form of a time lapse, but with the camera moving very slowly while you're taking that time lapse to create a more immersive, interesting, dramatic video as the end result. Now, unlike the Mini, Air and Mavic series of DJI drones, which have automatic hyperlapse functions, which basically create hyperlapses at the push of a button, because the Neo doesn't have that, we have two sides which we can address. For the time-lapse side of things, we can use the timed shot function on the Neo, which allows you to take 2 or 3 second interval shots, and that'll continually shoot and allows you to create a manual time-lapse. For the movement of the drone, which has to be very slow and constant, that's really important. It has to be very slow, constant movement to look good. For that, we're going to use the cruise control function, which is supported in the Neo, and we're going to use that to create that very slow, gradual movement while we're taking that time lapse. Now, there's a few prerequisites of things that you need to be able to do hyperlapses on this. First of all, you're going to need a few batteries because you only get about 10 to 15 minutes flight out of this, and that's going to create about a 10 to 15 second hyperlapse if you're lucky. So one hyperlapse per battery is the most you're going to get, so make sure you've got spare ones of these available. You're going to need a very calm day. Any windy conditions are not going to work with this because any yaw movement, unwanted movement in the drone is not going to make that hyperlapse look effective and good. So make sure you've got a nice calm day. In addition, you're also going to need a lot of patience because it'll probably take a few goes for this to go right. And finally, you're going to need a good software to edit your footage in, such as Adobe Premiere, DaVinci or Final Cut Pro, which allows you to stabilize that footage in post. Another top tip, unless you're taking the hyperlapse in dark conditions, you might want to use a filter on the Neo, which allows you to drop down your shutter speed down to the minimum, which is about 1/10 of a second. And that gives you a bit of motion blur and makes that hyperlapse look more interesting. I'm using the Freewell filters, which are, I think, go up to about ND32, which I've got fitted at the moment. It's starting to get a bit darker, so I might drop that down to an ND16. But basically those filters are magnetic and can be fitted very quickly, and I love that about them. But any filters will work, but if you're interested in these ones, there's a link in the description below. So let's get straight into it. I'm going to take off and show you how you can create a hyperlapse. Okay, now you need to be quite quick with this because the Neo has quite a limited flight time and it's not going to give you much room to kind of set things up as you're flying. So be ready to go, practice what you're going to do, have your settings ready, and be ready to kind of use as much of your battery as possible to take your hyperlapse. So I've got cruise control enabled on one button, exposure lock on the other button. So I've got those two settings ready to be locked in place. I'm going to choose my timed shots and I'm going to set it to 2 seconds. You can use 3, but I find 2 seconds is better because you don't want it to be too fast unless you're looking for that kind of specific hyperlapse look. In terms of my camera settings, I've got Pro mode enabled. I've got ISO on auto. Shutter speed as low as possible, so 1/10 of a second. And I've got neutral exposure, EV at 0, so that's fine. Adjust that if you need to. I'm not going to lock that exposure, so press exposure lock. Doing this kind of method by having ISO on auto, but locking it gives you kind of like an HDR look, which I quite like. You might not, so it's up to you how you do that. But in order to get that HDR, use auto ISO and then lock that exposure in place. Or you can use auto settings and lock it, but obviously I want to control my shutter speed as well, and I want that to be at fixed 1/10 of a second. So I'm going to start flying backwards, and I want less than 1 kilometer an hour, so I'm going to use about 0.7 and a little bit of throttle just to give me a little bit of a rising feel to the shot as well. Then I'm going to press cruise control. So I've now got it locked in place, rising 0.4 kilometers an hour and flying backwards at about 0.8 kilometers an hour. Now I'm going to start the timed shots. And I'm actually just going to adjust this a tiny bit, so I'm going to exclude that first frame. And as you can see, there's not too much movement in the camera, and that's what you're looking for. You don't want any unwanted movement. If there is, I'd land, recalibrate the compass, try a different orientation, or just try another day when it's less windy. But if you've got too much movement in the camera, it's just not going to work. It's not going to look very good, and you're wasting your time. So bear that in mind. That's one of the tricky things with the Neo, because it's a small drone. It's only got a one-axis stabilized, or one-axis mechanically stabilized camera. It's quite limiting, but you can get good results out of it if you're patient. But watching that footage, it looks like there's not too much movement. What I like to do is I've got the diagonal lines on the screen, and I can kind of fix that on a particular place on the scenery and kind of see if there's much movement against those lines. If there is, like I said, I just land again or try a different orientation or try again. Okay, so now you've got 10 minutes to kill, so have a beer, do some press-ups, chill, listen to some tunes, whatever you want to do. Just gotta wait. Right, that's shush. That's the Hyperlapse shooting side of things done. So now you're going to take those images, drop them onto your computer or laptop. I'm going to be using Adobe Premiere to create the Hyperlapse. If you're using one of the other softwares like Final Cut Pro or DaVinci, there are plenty of online tutorials on creating Hyperlapses from still images. So if you search one of those, they'll show you how it's done. But I'm using Adobe Premiere, so let's get into it. Okay, with your images downloaded onto your computer or laptop, open the folder that you place them into. And the first thing you want to do is select all of those images and rename them to ensure that they've got a numerical sense. So on my MacBook, I'm going to click rename, give them a name, click rename. So that's now renamed those images into numerical order that makes sense for the editing software that you're going to use, so that it can then interpret that sequence as an image sequence as opposed to individual images. Okay, so I'm going to create a new project. I'm going to create a sequence. I normally use 30 frames per second, but use whatever you want to use. And then I'm going to import that image sequence. So now comes the important part. So rather than importing those images individually, we need to make sure that we import them as an image sequence. So to do that, click on one image, click on show options, and make sure that the image sequence checkbox is checked. If that isn't checked, you're going to import those images as individual images, which you don't want to do. You want this to be one sequence converted into a video. So click on import and drag that video into your timeline. And you've now got an unstabilized version of that video. As you might remember earlier in the video, I mentioned that I was going to exclude the first few frames because I repositioned them. So I'm just going to go and find those frames, which is just about here. So I'm going to remove those first 3 frames. And next I'm going to stabilize that footage. So to do that, go into the effects panel, search for warp stabilizer, drag that onto your video. It'll now start analyzing and stabilizing your footage. If you go into the effect settings, you can see it's started analyzing. It's quite quick normally. You've got a few things that you can change, like your smoothness, the type of stabilization, the amount of cropping and so on. But I find normally leave it as default. It tends to work quite well, but you can tweak it if you need to. Right, with that being done, you've now got a stabilized version, which looks like this. And that doesn't actually look too bad at all. Now, I normally record my images in 4:3 aspect ratio, which is a good idea or good practice to get into, because what that allows you to do is to reposition and reframe your footage a little bit if you need to. So you can move it up and down a bit without losing any quality. But the other thing you can do is you can put some keyframes in and actually move the camera as if you're tilting the camera down, which is something that we can't do mechanically with the Neo, but you can sort of digitally create the effect of adding a bit of camera tilt as you go through that hyperlapse. So I think I'm going to tilt that camera down. So I'm going to put in a keyframe and take it to the last frame. I'm just going to move that down a tiny bit like that, which means that as that hyperlapse happens, it basically looks like the camera is starting to tilt down, which is a slightly nicer look. To finish the whole thing, you might want to just adjust your colors a little bit. Okay, and that's basically it. So the end result is going to look like this. And that's all there is to creating a hyperlapse with a small, overachieving drone like the Dji Neo, which isn't intended for that kind of purpose. But as you can see, if you know what you're doing, if you're a bit creative, and if you've got a bit of patience, even the Neo can create a hyperlapse. So as usual, if you like this kind of content and you want to see more of this, remember to like and subscribe and all that jazz. Until next time, happy flying, stay safe, and I'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.